We'll have to see how this all plays out, Jonathan. President Donald Trump, though, wants to form a United States Space Force in the next 2 years, and here he is making the announcement in June.
When it comes to defending America, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space. So important.
So it would be a new sixth branch of the U.S. military. Trump's defense secretary and vice president laid out their reasoning at the Pentagon Thursday.
It is becoming a contested warfighting domain, and we have got to adapt to that reality. It's on par with the air, land, sea, and cyberspace domains.
Our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already, and the United States will not shrink from this challenge.
Trump's proposal comes just 35 years after Ronald Reagan's famous Star Wars defense speech, and it also follows American intelligence warnings that China and Russia are developing ultra-fast hypersonic space weapons. Now, to take a look at this Space Force, let's go to Keith Cowing, editor of NASAWatch.com, an astrobiologist and a former rocket scientist. Keith, you've had a long career in space. This is not a new idea. So what do you make of the reasoning behind this Space Force?
Well, first of all, the U.S., like Russia, China, and many other countries, has had a military interest and presence in space for well over half a century. So nothing is new. And there's sort of two sides to this argument. Some people say, oh, you need something called a Space Force to show our intent to be interested in this whole notion of defending ourselves in space. And other people say, we're already doing it. And to a certain extent, this is a marketing issue of saying, well, now we have a Space Force. Does that mean we're more serious than we were before? I think in reality, what you'll find out is that there's other people who have a say in this Congress and so forth who will weigh in on this. And at the end of the day, the really big question is, are we going to just waste money? You know, I mean, do they have new uniforms? You know, I mean, as a matter of fact, hours, I mean, minutes after the announcement yesterday, the Trump 2020 presidential campaign put an email out to all the supporters saying, here, pick a new logo for the Space Force. So there's
there we go. We're seeing all the logos you can choose from.
And
vote
I
your
think they
choice.
should be soliciting a few new choices personally, but a couple of them are a little weird. The upper left-hand corner, Space Force, is a ripoff of the old NASA logo. And then the lower right, there's one about going to Mars. NASA is a civilian government agency. It has been for 60 years. It's this year. So it's a little troubling to see some political people thinking, oh, we can just sell hats and T-shirts, and that maybe our real focus is, you know, taking our civilian space program and morphing it into something, well, not civilian. That would be troubling.
There's so many questions, Keith.
Yeah.
You mentioned the money. With everything else and all the space ambitions out there, Mars, landing on the far side of the moon, we noticed that there was a probe that's on its way to the sun right now. Where does a Space Force fit in, and how much money are we talking about?
Well, right now, the Space Force, this is just something that's akin to a reorganization of people's mail codes and offices at the Pentagon. And of course, the running joke is if you're going to add another service branch, is the Pentagon going to become a hexagon? I mean, a lot of people treat it as such. And at the end of the day, odds are the money that's going to be spent on this will be mostly on reorganizing people who are already doing this job. And some may argue that we're already spending money on this. We're already aware of other threats from other countries. We're already focused on that. Should we focus on focusing on what we're already focusing on and not on this other sort of, you know, it's almost like you know, next week on Space Force, we're going to talk about this. You know, it's almost got a TV show aspect to it.
Again, so many questions. But one thing that stands out is the future of this. There's this timeline of 2 years of having a Space Force up and running. The reality you mentioned, but could another administration come and scrap the idea?
Yes, and of course we already have the Space Force. That's sort of the point that people are making. We're just going to move them to different offices in the Pentagon, but they'll be doing the same job. But Congress has to go along with this. There's a budget that has to go with this, and they've said that they won't be asking for new funds until next year. We may have a totally different Congress at that point. And politics being what they are, the ideas from the opposition party don't always get the support from the other party that they would like to get. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we will have a Space Force in 2020. But rest assured, we'll still be doing all the things that the Space Force will eventually do.
What has been the reaction that you've seen among your peers and perhaps other space agencies or groups around the world? How are they looking at this?
Shouldn't we be talking about something else? I mean, we're already doing this, and it's sort of like restating the obvious. Again, you know, this whole notion of the use of space as a military asset, and again, the pervasiveness of it. The car I came in this morning had a GPS on it. It uses a GPS satellite, which is a military system that's been in operation for decades. And so we've already got this whole idea of how to balance these things together. We know what the threats are. We're dealing with them. Maybe we should just focus on, again, what we're already doing. And if there's extra funds, maybe put it on something that's got a bigger impact outside of the defense sphere. Again, the missions you mentioned. And maybe we should be collaborating a little bit more with our enemies because, again, as we've discussed before, with all the terrestrial political nonsense that's going on, the one place that seems to be completely isolated from this is the International Space Station. Everybody gets along in space. Maybe we ought to be looking at what's going on up there and apply it back down to what we're doing here on Earth.
That is an important point to make, and one that doesn't get brought up as often. Everyone gets along up there in outer space. Keith Cowling, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.